There's lots of ways in which what you leave your children can be lost. Ozzy anticipated this. The trust is set up to where that money can never be claimed by third parties. There's an understanding among all concerned, including the beneficiary, that I don't want this out of the trust any sooner than I need it or I have a specific purpose for it, because it's much safer there than it is in my hands.
Welcome to Life's Third Act, an enlightening look at estate planning, retirement, and beyond.
Okay, we're back again with another episode of Life's Third Act. We're picking up with, this will essentially be part two of talking about Ozzy Osbourne. In the first half, we talked about, his life, his career, some things relating to his success. You don't have to have watched that in order to benefit from this show today, but I encourage you to go back and watch it if you have time. But otherwise, go forward with us today. Today, we're going to talk about, how did his life turn out? How did the last third of his life work out financially with his family? What was his plan? And did his plan work? Did it make sense? What were his assets generally at the end of his life? That's going to be our focus today. So I hope you enjoy it. He worked hard at restoring his relationship with his kids. And it wasn't just at the end that you can do that. You can't do that in the last 2 years of your life. You can do it, you do what you can. So if you have 2 years and you have a mess in terms of your relationship with key figures in your life, yeah, you do what you can. But success rarely is complete just with that. Often it's an effort that takes place over a little longer period of time. And for Ozzy, he started giving it a lot of attention in this century. I think by the latter 90s, by the time they were starting to do the Osbourne show, Ozzy was engaged. And he stayed engaged, and he not only with his kids, but with his 10 grandkids. So Ozzy is to be credited with creating a groundwork which facilitated his creating his estate plan. So I dwelled on that to make clear to you that the success of your estate plan does hinge to a great extent upon the people that will be enjoying these fruits, and some of whom presumably will be in charge of managing those assets and assuring that estate continues to thrive and grow and survive. Let me stop here and remind you, what we're doing with the show in order to build our estate planning practice at Cordell & Cordell is we want to encourage people who watch this show to contact us and let us talk to you about your estate planning. In order to encourage you to do that, we're offering a 15% discount. So if you walk in, if you make an appointment with the Cordell & Cordell office anywhere in the country, we will take off 15% of what that charge would otherwise be if you mentioned that you saw it on this show. We don't know how long we'll continue doing this, but we kind of want to jumpstart our estate planning group at Cordell & Cordell. And while I love doing this show, we've not really given any serious attention to trying to encourage additional clients to come to us for estate planning. So this represents that effort. So I hope that some of the things we say on here will stimulate you in terms of what you want to do for yourself, and also encourage you to give us a call at Cordell & Cordell. So mention the show, 15% off. Ozzy had in place the family network. Another thing that came out in articles that were published thereafter and comments that were made was that Ozzy and Sharon, I'm sure Sharon as well, they communicated years before his death. There was this understanding what the plan was going to be when Ozzy was gone. Granted, he's a legend. He has a reputation that will endure. We don't know how long. The thing about intellectual property, is that some people were finding artists die and their popularity is sustained for decades. And in some cases, they go from a period in which they're not as famous when they die and they become famous later, just like artists did. All those examples of people who we accept today as truly famous, notoriously Van Gogh was somebody who was entirely neglected during his life and maybe at the very end was getting some recognition, but no significant recognition. It was after he died that happened. So, I mean, that can happen with artists today, musicians and others, is that their fame, we don't know how long it'll endure. In this case, we have an estate in which there's So I've been told like 300 million plus a year in revenues is being thrown off through all of his recordings, through his copyrights on music that he wrote and co-wrote, through his screen rights associated with his appearance in television and elsewhere as residuals. So, and all those, that name, image, likeness, merchandise. I don't know that number's correct, but that was quoted in, what was it, The Economic Times. And I could find it believable. Now, that's gross revenues. It's not net. So you have expenses associated, et cetera. So the whole idea, though, is to have a mechanism to keep all this in place and keep it flowing thereafter. And so that communication with the family is critical. So we have this family in which Ozzy had invested the effort to restore and rebuild relationships, to have harmony among the kids. It's never perfect, but apparently this is a family that gets along, and that's a great achievement for a lot of kids in many families. Then there was the communication and this consensus around the plan. So in my notes here, I made a note that it wasn't just communication, it was a consensus around this plan that he laid out. And the plan was pretty straightforward. There are several objectives, so it's reported. The first objective to their plan, they wanted their plan to accomplish these things, was to assure that wealth benefited only the family. Now, that's not an obvious statement. Often there are other priorities. Now, Ozzy did care about pets, and there was some money that went to pets through this animals. But other than very small portions of the wealth, it was to stay in the family. And not just the wealth, but the management. So often people will include, in people that were important in their lives, managers, other professionals around them that help them. It's not uncommon to include people other than family and your estate plan as beneficiaries. But in this case, Ozzy and Sharon, I'm sure, agreed that we want our family to be able to enjoy this wealth. And that was a key objective. Keep everything in the family, which means keeping control. Keep ownership and control. This is the control aspect of all aspects of Ozzy's name, image, likeness, and other intellectual property. So the other key factor was you could achieve one by keeping wealth in the family and still sell off all those things and just take the money and manage the money for the benefit of the family. But it wasn't just to keep the wealth in the family. It was also to assure that all those things associated with all things Ozzy were to stay in the control of the family. That's somewhat of a controversial decision because often the best opportunities are to sell these things. And many do. I mean, Bob Dylan, who would have thought that he would sell his songbook and whatnot, but he did. And so it's not uncommon. Many do that. And even when you have loved ones, it doesn't mean that they don't benefit. It just means that you don't have them involved in managing all that. But the way the Osbournes felt was they wanted to keep all of that in the control of the family. I think they're determined to keep Ozzy's name and legend, and there is a name and legend of Ozzy. They want to keep that going for decades to come, and they want to control how he's represented. And really, you need to own it to keep that control. I mean, when you sell it, you get a check, and part of the things that person paid for is to have some control over how they market it. So that was objective number 2, keep that ownership and control. And number 3, assure the family regular, multi-generational income. This was something that this is an often debated question. Do you want to assure income to your children, your family members? There are a number of people who feel very strongly that is not a good thing. Warren Buffett, most famously, is among those, but there are a lot of those people. But in this case, they want the family to be assured a regular multi-generational income, which now is permissible through Dynasty trusts. Whether you're rich or poor, you can have those. But in this case, I think that that means that they have to have the assets under circumstances where money can be available. I don't think it means that it's pushed out unnecessarily to children and then grandchildren and maybe even the next generation. It means that money can be available for them to affect their lifestyle as needed or at the discretion of the trustee. So it doesn't mean that you throw money at rich kids, which sometimes happens with trusts. I think the point here is to assure that income is there that can be paid out to people to enhance the quality of their lives. And the nice thing about doing it in the context of a trust is if you give the trustee the discretion, which I'm very confident is the case here, the trustee will use that discretion to determine whether it's a good thing to continue paying out money. Maybe it's better to accumulate it for that person and not pay it out. So paying out money doesn't have to occur as something that could be very destructive in the lives of kids. But it's something wealthy people debate. Achieving the objective. So how do you accomplish this? Well, they did this by creating an irrevocable trust. And the wonderful thing about irrevocable trust is, you get to choose kind of two key roles. One is who's going to administer the trust. I'm confident. Again, there's some speculation in this show, as there often is, but I'm pretty confident that the person who's administering the trust, meaning running the administrative side of the trust, as distinguished from managing the assets. Do you see the difference? So you can administer and run like a corporation and still not be in charge of any of the operations, within the corporation or segments of services, specific services and products within the entity. It's a rough analogy. But anyway, so I'm pretty confident that Sharon continues to be the administrator of this trust, which means the trustee. The primary role of the trustee is to administer. But the trustee is also responsible for the management of assets, but it does not imply that they, in fact, are the ones who manage it. They can delegate that role. And I'm sure that there will be delegation of some of that role. We don't know the details, but we do strongly suspect that the distribution plan, it looks like the goal, Ozzy wanted all the kids to benefit equally, that initially Sharon is provided for, of course, for her life, for the balance of her life, that there will be assets that will be set aside, I suspect, through subtrusts in each of the 6 kids. So Ozzy's perspective was that he wanted all of his kids to benefit equally. And I respect that, because it's tempting when you have kids who impress you to varying degrees, or who some have managed their lives very poorly, or may have been disrespectful, maybe have, just done things that were hard to forget and overlook. Often those parents will discriminate in terms of the amount of money they give, especially to older kids. I don't see this happen when the kids are in their 20s or even certainly younger. But often when the kids are 40, 50, 60, 70-year-old kids, it's not unusual to see that discrimination. But in this case, of course, the kids are younger, although they have to be in their 40s, right? 30s, 40s?
Yeah, late 30s, early 40s, I believe.
So the kids here, Ozzy was clear. He wanted them all to be treated the same. And incidentally, several of these kids are very successful. Jack is in show business in some degree. I think he's a producer, but his net worth was estimated to be like $20 million plus. He had a sister that was high teens.
Kelly.
So, his kids appear to be reasonably successful. I don't know the situation of all of them. But anyway, so Ozzy's objective was he wanted to take care of his family. He wanted his family to control his image and his reputation and going forward. And he wanted the money to be shared by all of his kids equally. And he wanted Sharon, of course, to be in charge as long as she could be. These are not unusual provisions, but they were very thoughtful. And for this to work, seeds had to be sown years before his passing, and those seeds were sown by Ozzy. And so for that, I give him great credit. And when we talk about how these assets, the particular type of assets would be managed, I just wanted to kind of give you a sense of what the scope of some of these assets are. Again, we don't know lots of things. We know that there's real estate in the United States and in California specifically, and in the UK. There's this massive house this is where Ozzy was buried, on this estate. And what was that estate called? Oh, Welder's house. You ought to look it up online. Let's include some pictures of Welder's house. But the Osbournes bought this in the early '80s and renovated. But it's a historic home. It goes back, I don't know how many centuries. But it's a beautiful manor house and grounds, and they added tennis courts and other things. It's truly impressive. So apparently they're going to hang on to this property, which is no small matter to manage. This is just an example of how, keeping these things in the family through the trust, it requires professionals. Sharon can oversee a lot, but she's going to have to delegate to professionals. And then there's the merchandising, the merchandising goes on around the world, both Black Sabbath and Ozzy branded. So Black Sabbath was very popular for guys to wear Black Sabbath T-shirts, I can tell you, throughout the 70s and 80s, and I was seeing them in the 90s. But then Ozzy branded shirts. Then the endorsements, these endorsements come along, including this Ozzy Fest, which I suspect that branded event will be revived. At least that's what his wife has made clear is her intention. So we have the value in valuing his estate. There are numerous guitars, wardrobes, artwork. Apparently, Ozzy did play guitar somewhat, right? I never saw him perform playing guitar.
I've never seen a guitar in his hand in my life.
Apparently he had this great guitar collection.
Can imagine that.
And then, of course, his gold records and other historic artifacts relating to his career. The rights to an autobiography, I don't know if those have been sold yet. Royalties ongoing. So there was an autobiography, one that was authorized. So you have revenues coming in related to that. So you have the music catalog and royalties, real estate holdings, media television rights. So I think at the time, they had the ability to negotiate residuals on their shows, which people, in decades before rarely got that, or didn't, at least unless they were a big star, they didn't get the residuals. They were paid when they were on, these regular, like weekly television shows. That just, is a somewhat newer phenomenon. Festival and business ventures, personal memorabilia and items. So a lot of stuff there. So one other thing I want to say before I wrap up here is that creating this trust and placing a trustee in charge and the various delegations it will require to run these several sorts of businesses, so to speak, requires attention, it requires effort. It's tempting to just sell off everything and be done with it and put the money in a bank and draw interest. That's what some people do, but that's not what Ozzy wanted, and Sharon agreed, and his plan calls for keeping family control over all things Ozzy. Another thing, though, that this trust provides is that one of the biggest problems you have when you leave things to loved ones is that often creditors can come along, and if the trust isn't worded correctly, creditors can sue the trust, can get access to money. You can have divorces in which money that was clearly intended to go to a son or daughter ends up 50% of it in the hands of an ex-son-in-law or ex-daughter-in-law. That probably is the more common risk, but risk coming from all directions: lawsuits, business failures, just bad investments. There's lots of ways in which what you leave your children can be lost. Ozzy anticipated this. The trust is set up to where there's asset protection, meaning that money can never be claimed by third parties as long as it's in the trust, and whatever part is paid out is available. But the point is, at any given time, there's only paid out what the person needs or requires, or whatever the understanding may be. So there's an understanding among all concerned, including the beneficiary, that I don't want this out of the trust any sooner than I need it, or I have a specific purpose for it, because it's much safer there than it is in my hands. The other thing that they assure is tax efficiency. So there was a pretty substantial tax paid here, even with the tax planning that I'm sure was done. I'm sure these assets were transferred in I don't know this, but I'm guessing probably after the year 2000, in the early aughts of that decade, which means that the appreciation that occurred after that was protected because it was inside the trust. So there were things that were done to minimize taxes, but keep in mind, the tax rate, which is a very steep rate, it goes almost immediately to 40%. So at a 40% rate, you can see how somebody who inherits a lot of money can still, find themselves with much less money available to fund the plan they envisioned than would have been the case if they could have avoided the taxes entirely. I'm pretty confident that there was a substantial chunk of taxes paid out of this money, whether it was $50 million or so. I don't know that number, but in any case, my hat's off. My hat's off to Ozzy. Having made a number of mistakes early in his career. I mean, he worked hard. He really was determined to end well, and he did end well. The fact that he had some very fortunate events that we can't count on in our lives come along should not diminish the fact that he did what he could, and he did it consistently in the last decades of his life. So from a standpoint of an estate planner, I have to respect Ozzy for the efforts that he made. But I said earlier that I think of Ozzy more as a miracle than as a role model. Things turned out wonderfully for him, but it very easily could not have. And he had problems that haunted him throughout all those years, which in a way add to this sense. When I say miracle, the factors underlying that are not just they did well, but that he had severe problems early on, and he never completely shed some of those. So they still kind of haunted him in the last decades of his life. He had, I don't want to play the role of psychiatrist, but there were issues, and some of those issues continued to persist. I don't know whether it was manic depression. Who knows what it was that explained, some of the events, the behavior and whatnot that occurred. But the alcohol and substance abuse probably grew out of some of that, but he was never able to fully lick it. So it's like he had these challenges that hung on, that were over him like this cloud. But in the midst of all that, he was still working to succeed. He was still working to restore relationships with his family, to be a good husband, to manage money well. And yes, he had this incredibly good fortune of having this person enter his life, Sharon, who I think without her it might not have ended this way. So he's a miracle in that sense, in that I'm glad he ended as well as he did, and he was successful in his career, and he left a reputation with his family that is good. So for those reasons, we would applaud him. But we wouldn't suggest this as a career track or as a strategy generally for the way someone would conduct their lives. But we certainly can point to the things he did later in his life as wonderful examples, as things I've just described to you in terms of estate planning. That's precisely how it should be done. And that was the way he did it. So for that, I applaud Ozzy Osbourne. So this has been another episode of Life's Third Act. Till next time, take care.
We hope you enjoyed Life's Third Act, sponsored by Cordell & Cordell, your advisors for estate planning and beyond. Subscribe and join us weekly for thought-provoking discussion and topics exclusively focused on estate planning and your financial future. Discover more at CordellCordell.com. The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely on advertisements.